Hello, everyone. I am the organizer of the 2020 Taipei Film Academy XR workshop, and this is the QA session with our amazing speaker, Mr. John Kenning. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So, John, let's just dive right into the questions, shall we?
Sure.
Okay. So the first question is, could you explain a bit more or give us an example of how virtual production pipeline works and give us an idea of how it's different from the traditional post-production?
Sure. Virtual production can mean a lot of things, but a lot of folks are centering around this idea of using LED stages or other projection means to put your backdrop instead of using a green screen process, using imagery, usually driven by a real-time engine, so that in camera you're capturing both your subjects and then these backgrounds. And you can actually enhance a lot of process. If you think about as a traditional filmmaker, you're going out and trying to capture golden hour for that brief period of time that you have the wonderful light at sunset. With a green screen process, you could have golden hour for 10 hours. The other part of this, though, is that you have to realize that a lot of your decisions that would be traditionally made, say in post, put a green screen there, we're going to figure out what imagery goes behind it, has to be created much earlier in the process.
Okay, see. So the next question, could you give us some examples of how technologies serve storytelling and how do they help move the story forward?
Sure. I think if you look at XR technology, it's just and the virtual production conversation just previously, it's about leveraging new tools to help us do our job better. For example, at Digital Domain, we use AI and machine learning not to replace somebody, but to be able to solve the facial capture to a rig so much faster than we could ever do, which enables us to do a whole lot more high resolution facial capture and processing than we would ever be able to do before by hand. So technology is, if we look at the XR space, even if we're just using it as tools to visualize, to plan, to see what we're shooting, it's tremendous. Previs, thinking about what I want to shoot before I shoot it, especially if you're doing it in, say, a busy downtown area in Taipei, you may not be able to do a ton of camera setups. You may not be able to figure out how you want your camera moves ahead of time unless you do a previs, model it, see what it looks like, and then when you go to a physical location, bam, you can you set up, you shoot, you get what you want.
Thanks, John. The next question, could you talk a bit about how we can capture the nuance and build a virtual character? What are the key elements?
So I think there are a couple of key elements. One is visual and one is audio. So in a virtual character, what you need to have is expressive features and face, right? If you think about it, your whole body gives expressions. Your hands, your face, your body movements. You want to be able to, when you're creating a virtual character, bring those nuances forth. Now, you can, and it's a deliberate idea of what's the fidelity of your digital character, because you can have a relatively low resolution avatar, but as long as they can bring a smile or a look, you might be able to convey emotion. Being able to take that and capture it from a performance, or to be able to animate it and deliver it to the character is key. But I also have to say that audio should never be diminished and forgotten, because if I just look at somebody, there's one expression, but the tone of a voice, the richness of a voice, the inflection of a voice can also convey a lot of emotion. So you have to think about the whole package when you're pulling together. And that's just a quick and simple answer, because I think the concept of building digital characters is quite complex, and there's a lot of nuance to it.
Okay, thanks, John. So the next question, how can we use characters to drive the story and help the user get involved in the environment in a XR experience? Could you give us some examples?
So I think if I think of Wolves in the Wall as a VR experience, and the richness of that experience is all about the central character and her interaction with you, and that playfulness she brings. Um, Characters are everything in a story, and they move a story along. Um, and in an XR environment, you get a much more potential intimate relationship with them, and so you can use them as the sometimes that break a fourth wall, because you're now in a story potentially in an XR environment. How that character interacts with you or doesn't act with you, or acts as a guide, or is acting with the environment, can help really immerse someone in the story, because an XR experience is a lot about immersion, not necessarily always interactivity, but definitely about immersion.
Right. How about, can you talk about like how the characters might maybe trigger someone into the next part of the journey of the story, and can you give us some examples of that?
Sure. Um, if I think of The Crow as one of those experiences, you have a guide who moves through the story, but he doesn't say, "I'm your guide, come follow me," but you're following somebody on a journey. And as they move and they bring you along, it's sort of a natural, just kind of bring you along into that. And you can either have characters that are overtly bringing you along, speaking to you, or just in the sense of if they move and they go through a door, they're going to, you know, pull you along through that. Um, so I think, but it's also interesting, and depending on the kind of experience you're creating, there can be other visual cues from the character, other than characters, audio cues, even UI cues. It really depends on the kind of experience you're building. I think the thing with an XR experience is you're building an immersive environment. Um, it is somewhere between what we would consider, a game world and a live action world. We're blending these interesting moments. And so, look, I mean, if you're thinking about Vader Immortal, um, there are menus and other physical things, and not just a character that move you along. So, what is the environment? What is the story, and how can you use the environment so it isn't necessarily need to be an overt "come this way"?
Okay, thank you, John. Um, so this question is, as a filmmaker, we often feel the social responsibilities when making films, especially projects that are social issue driven or documentaries. You mentioned during the talk that you put a lot of effort into bringing back Dr. King and the speech truthfully. Could you talk a bit more about that?
I would say working on XR is no different than thinking about. I've worked on media projects that are non-scripted, fictional, and I've worked on media projects that are documentaries. And it really, the underlying mechanisms to tell those stories is it's less about that and more about what story you're trying to do, or what you're trying to do, or what you're trying to achieve. When we were working on the project, The March, and reproducing Dr. King in that environment, it was a historical recreation. And because we were working with a journal, because A, of the subject matter, and B, working with a journalistic outlet like Time, there was the focus of the historical integrity. And you have to think about that. It's regardless of what medium I'm using, it's what am I trying to serve? And in that case, we weren't trying to interpret, we were trying to faithfully reproduce. We were trying to bring something in 3 dimensions that you had only seen in two dimensions. And I think those are conscious decisions that creators make. Am I telling a truthful story, a factual story? What perspective am I bringing to it? And it's always a struggle. And I think, it's more, even instead of documentary, we were working with a journalistic outlet, right? So the goal to say adhere to those, um, uh, adhere to a certain bar that was historically accurate was important. because we were working with this entity, and that was the focus. And we all felt, as a part of that project, that was key.
Right. Thanks, John. That's all of our questions. And so thanks again for mentoring the workshop. We'll see you hopefully next year in Taiwan.
Thank you so much for having me.